Hey, this is Gerard. Before we go to our official broadcast today, I need to give you a disclaimer. We are doing a feature today about using analogies for crisis communications. I use two analogies in it. One is from people who believe that the information about COVID-19 is inflated, and the other is information based on numbers from the CDC and people who believe that those numbers are accurate. For the sake of transparency, seconds before I was about to hit publish, a poll came out from Axios that says 1/3 of Americans do not believe the death rates and the illness rates from the Center for Disease Control. So if you are among the 1/3 who think those numbers are inflated, then my video today will probably just aggravate you, and I would encourage you simply to leave now. My lessons are never intended to be political. They're never intended to represent a political bias. These are difficult times because no matter what we try to communicate, people try to add a political overtone to it. I always try not to have a political overtone, but it's pretty hard today to build these lessons for you without someone making accusations. Do I have a bias? Yes, I have a bias. My bias is based on nearly dying. I've spent 12 days in an ICU on a 21-day trip to the hospital with 2 surgeries, and in one of those, they gave me a 70% chance of dying. I came back for a 3rd surgery 6 weeks later and spent 14 more days in the hospital. I have an 8-inch scar that's about 2 inches wide that runs down my belly, and every day I see it, and I thank God that I had doctors who were able to save my life. So my bias is that I trust doctors and I trust medicine. If your bias is otherwise, then you probably should hit escape and leave this video now. Now, for those of you who are staying with me, sorry that we're living in an age where I have to do a disclaimer. This video is about 11 minutes long. So get a fresh cup of coffee, or if it's late in the day, get a cocktail, especially if you're working from home. Sit down, dig in, because we are going deep on the issue of analogies in crisis communications with COVID-19. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of the broadcast, where we give you bite-sized bits of best practices to help you be a better leader and a more effective communicator. I'm your host, Gerard Braud. Today, we're going to look at 3 things: COVID-19, crisis communications, and the use of effective analogies. So let's put things into perspective. I'm recording this on the 26th of July, 2020. 1,000 people per day are dying of the disease. About 150,000 people have died. Those are statistics for the United States of America. And in the communications battle that has happened, what's really been odd about this is that there are 2 sides to the messaging, which you normally do not get in a crisis. One side, there are people saying take precautions, prevent the disease from spreading. On the other side, there are people saying it's no big deal, it's the same as the common flu. The side saying it's the common flu is using an analogy. The side that is trying to stop the spread of the disease has not found a compelling analogy. Now, I heard a doctor on TV the other day use what had the potential to be a compelling analogy, but he failed to land and stick the message. His analogy was that the number of people dying, he equated them to the number of people who would die in an airplane crash. Really smart. But I haven't heard it again. I've heard it only from one doctor, and part of the reason, I think, is because they're failing to really land the analogy. So I have written a script, and it's in the blog, so you can go and get it if you want to use it as an analogy. If you are training a spokesperson at a hospital or any other business or institution where you're trying to stop the spread of the disease, this is what I've done. This is what I've written with the analogy about the airplane crash. Now, in order for an analogy to stick, you need 4 elements. There has to be a degree of facts tied to the analogy, but secondly, there has to be passion in the delivery. There has to be a degree of outrage, and the message believe it or not, has to contain some element of fear. And of course, a degree of acting to bring the outrage out. So with that, I'm going to go into the scene of how I might start training a spokesperson to use this analogy, and you're welcome to use this as well. Here we go. On a daily basis in the United States of America, it is like 5 737 MAX 8 jets crashing right now. Now think about this. Governments around the world were outraged because 2 of these jets crashed, killing a total of 346 people. Governments and airlines banned the airplane from flying because 346 people died. Yet in the United States, 1,000 die a day. In the United States, 150,000 have already died since March. Yet here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and there is no outrage when the number of people who die every day in the United States is equal to 5 jets crashing every day. Let that sink in. 5 airplanes going down every day, and everybody on board dies, leaving behind mothers and fathers, and children and sons and daughters and family members. Yet there is an outrage over this. The number of people who have died since the pandemic began in March is equal to, ready for this, 750 jet airplanes crashing and killing everyone on board. Now, as a country, would we sit idly by if 5 jets crashed every day for 5 months? As a country, would we not be outraged if 750 jets fell out of the sky and killed 150,000 US citizens? That's, let me say it again, 750 jet crashes in 5 months. The answer is no, we would not stand for it. So imagine if terrorists shot down 5 jet airplanes a day. Would we not be mobilizing as though we were going to war? Imagine if terrorists killed 150,000 US citizens over 5 months. Would we not be mobilizing every bit of energy as a united nation to stop those terrorists from taking one more life? So why is it that we are okay as a country letting 1,000 US citizens die every day from a disease that we can fight and that we can stop? So why is it that as a country, we are okay with letting 150,000 of our neighbors, fellow US citizens, die in 5 months from a disease that we can fight and that we can stop? And scene. So that's an example of how a message might be delivered if you're going to combine facts with an analogy. What is so fascinating from a communicator's standpoint, now keep in mind, I don't discuss politics. I discuss communications from a crisis communication standpoint. Early in the pandemic, a message was put out that minimized the effects of the pandemic. That is a statement you've heard many times, both from elected officials, as well as in the media, as well as from friends and neighbors. And that message is, well, it's like the ordinary flu. People die every year from the ordinary flu. Well, That message stuck with at least 1/3 of Americans. What is interesting is that message stuck with an audience that is often motivated by fear. But they took the audience that normally is motivated by fear and they gave them a different analogy that said, you have nothing to fear. Now, it is not an accurate or true analogy. In the blog, I have a link to some statistics. I'll pull them up here on the screen. I'm going to read them for you. According to the Centers for Disease Control in 2016-2017, 38,000 U.S. citizens or people in America died. In 2017-2018, it was 61,000 people died in 1 year from the flu. So if we look at 10 years of the most recent statistics, there have been as few as 12,000 flu deaths in a year and a maximum of 61,000 flu deaths. So you continue to hear the analogy of it's the ordinary flu, you have nothing to worry about, or that it's just a cold. I've heard Rush Limbaugh say that. I've heard people minimize it on a daily basis. That's because the side that wanted you to believe that used an analogy effectively. It was sticky. It was easy to remember. It was easy to repeat. And so from a crisis communication standpoint, that side of the argument has been very sticky. Now, what's interesting about the analogy I'm sharing with you about the jet airplanes is let's combine jet airplane crashes with the audience that compares it to the flu. Imagine if you heard this. Imagine if you heard a president, members of Congress, governors, elected officials. Imagine if you heard them at a news conference after an airplane crashed and killed 200 people. Would they say in a public body, or would they say to the media, don't worry about that plane crash. More people die every year from the flu than die of plane crashes. Get yourself back on an airplane and get those planes in the air. Yeah, we're going to have 5 more go down tomorrow, but you know what? More people die from the flu. That would never happen. That would be preposterous. That would be outrageous. But here we are in the middle of a crisis, and the crisis isn't being solved. And one of the reasons is the messaging needs to be boosted. So let me leave you with a couple of thoughts in conclusion. Analogies are a great way to communicate. Analogies that tap into fear and outrage can be more effective. If you use analogies, you have to sell that analogy with a degree of passion and outrage. And when your analogy is compelling, other people will use it. So let's do an experiment. I'm giving all of you permission to take my analogy and use it. Let's sit back and watch and see whether or not the airplane crash analogy takes off and whether it makes a difference. For the broadcast, I'm Gerard Braud.